It was the year 1874, a time when the American West was filled with dusty roads, small towns, and wide open skies. Horses carried people from one place to another. Trains were just beginning to stretch across the land, and every town had its own stories. Some stories were small, about families, farms, or local festivals. But a few stories were whispered far and wide, growing bigger with every retelling. One of those stories belonged to Jesse James. Jesse was known all across Missouri. People spoke his name with mixed feelings. Some saw him as a hero who stood against powerful men, while others saw him as a troublemaker who lived on the edge of the law. But behind all the tales, behind the loud whispers and big headlines, there was also a young man with a heart that wanted something simple. Jesse wanted love. He had grown up in a world that wasn't always kind. From a young age, he had to be strong. He learned to ride horses fast, to think quickly, and to always be careful about who he could trust. But even in those early days, there was one person who made him feel calm. That person was Zerelda Mims. Zerelda was not a stranger to Jesse. She was his cousin, yes, but more than that, she was someone who understood him better than anyone else. Their families were close. They had spent many days together as children, running through fields, watching the sun set over the hills, and listening to the soft sound of crickets at night. She had a gentle smile and a quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need loud words to be felt. As the years went by, Jesse's life grew complicated. While the world saw him as a daring figure, Zerelda saw the boy she had grown up with. She saw the way his eyes softened when he talked about dreams that didn't involve running or hiding. She saw the way he relaxed when he was around family, away from the noise of the world. Their love did not happen suddenly. It grew slowly, like a tree planted in rich soil. Every shared conversation, every small act of kindness added to their bond. Jesse would visit her whenever he could. Sometimes he would bring her little things, a flower he picked on the road, a book someone gave him, or just a quiet smile. She didn't need grand gifts from him. All she wanted was honesty and a moment of peace in a restless world. In the evenings, when the sky turned pink and gold, they would sit on the porch and talk about a future that felt far away. Zerelda would listen to Jesse talk about how he wanted a small farm someday. Nothing fancy, just a place where they could live without looking over their shoulders. He spoke about how he wanted children to grow up running freely through the fields, just as they had when they were young. Zerelda would smile and say, "That sounds like a good life, Jesse." And for a few quiet minutes, the world outside would disappear. There were no headlines, no stories about daring deeds, no shadows of fear. There was only two people sitting together, dreaming. When Jesse finally asked Zerelda to marry him, it was not in a grand hall or in front of a crowd. It was a quiet moment, just the way they liked it. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and spoke softly. She said yes without hesitation. She knew the life she was choosing would not be easy. She knew the world saw Jesse as someone larger than life. But to her, he was simply the man she loved. Their wedding day was simple, too. It wasn't a royal ceremony or a public spectacle. It was held in the presence of family under the open sky. Jesse wore a plain suit, and Zerelda wore a light dress with flowers in her hair. People around them smiled, and though some worried about their future, most could see how truly happy they were. The air was warm that day, and the fields around them seemed brighter, as if nature itself was blessing their union. In those early days of their marriage, Jesse tried to build a life with Zerelda that was as normal as it could be. They moved between quiet places in Missouri, staying close to family whenever they could. In those quiet homes, Zerelda made their little spaces feel warm and full of love. She cooked meals, kept the house neat, and made sure Jesse had a place to rest after long days on the road. Jesse, for his part, tried to give her a sense of safety. He was always aware of the world outside, the way people talked about him. But in their home, he tried to be just Jesse, a husband, a friend, a man trying to keep a promise. Some evenings, they would walk through the fields together. Jesse would talk about how one day they would settle down in a place where no one knew their names, where they could raise their children in peace. Zerelda would hold his arm, lean close, and say, "As long as we're together, I'll be fine." She believed in him, not in the public image, not in the stories, but in the person she saw when they were alone. And that belief gave Jesse a kind of hope he hadn't felt in years. Zerelda had a calm way of steadying him. When his mind was full of worries, she would speak softly and remind him of their dreams. When the outside world felt too loud, her presence reminded him that there was still something good waiting for him. To many people, Jesse James was just a name that carried weight, a name they read about or whispered over. But to Zerelda, he was the man who brought her wildflowers, who stayed up late talking about a simple farm, who smiled quietly when she laughed. Their love was not built on wealth or fame. It was built on shared history, trust, and the belief that even in uncertain times, love could offer a kind of shelter. They had their own routines, their small rituals. Jesse would always keep a small picture of Zerelda with him, a reminder of the one person who saw his heart. He carried it not because he was afraid of losing her, but because it gave him strength to face the uncertain world. Whenever they had to part for a while, Zerelda would stand at the door and wave as he rode away. She never cried in front of him, but her eyes always carried a quiet hope. A hope that he would return soon and that their dream of a quiet, peaceful life would one day become real. Jesse would look back at her, tip his hat, and ride off. But no matter how far he went, the thought of her waiting at home kept him grounded. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was made of soft words, shared glances, small moments, and quiet dreams. In a world that seemed to spin too fast, they found their own little corner of stillness. Even when the outside world grew more complicated, Jesse's bond with Zerelda stayed steady. He knew she had chosen him, not for the stories others told, but for who he was deep inside. And that kind of love is rare. Every evening when they sat together, the world outside could talk and speculate, but inside their home, there was only two hearts trying to hold on to something pure. Jesse James may have been known as a famous figure in the Old West, but to Zerelda he was simply the man who loved her deeply, the man who spoke softly when the world got loud. Their story began not with grand gestures but with quiet moments, the kind that live forever in memory. It was this love, simple yet strong, that would shape the years that followed. Long before anyone whispered about what he did or where he went, there was a love story that began under the warm Missouri sun, between two people who found comfort in each other's presence. And no matter how the world remembers Jesse James, those who look closely at his story will find this gentle truth, that once upon a time, a man known to many was simply in love with a woman named Zerelda, and that love was the one thing in his life that felt truly real. After their wedding, Jesse James and Zerelda Mims started their married life with hope in their hearts. They both knew the world outside wasn't easy. Jesse's name was already known far and wide. People told many different stories about him. Some called him brave, some called him dangerous, but Zerelda didn't listen to those outside voices. To her, he was just the man she loved, the man who smiled softly when she talked, the man who dreamed of a simple, quiet life. Their first home together was small. It stood near wide fields that stretched far toward the horizon. In the early mornings, golden light would spill through the windows, filling the little house with a warm glow. Zerelda liked waking up before the sun fully rose. She would make coffee, sweep the floor, and hum soft songs while Jesse prepared the horses outside. He loved watching her move through the house with quiet grace, making every corner feel like home. Life together was not filled with riches, but it was full of small, meaningful moments. Jesse would bring fresh apples from a nearby farm, and Zerelda would bake pies that filled the air with a sweet smell. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. Zerelda would rest her head on Jesse's shoulder, and for a little while, the outside world disappeared. But even in these peaceful moments, there was something always hanging quietly in the air, a sense that their calm could be shaken at any time. Jesse understood this well. He had lived a life where he could never fully relax, where a knock on the door could mean something unexpected. Zerelda knew this too, but she chose to love him fully without holding back. When Jesse left the house for a few days or weeks, Zerelda never tried to stop him. She knew he carried responsibilities, and some of those responsibilities came from the world he had lived in before they married. She didn't ask too many questions. Instead, she stood at the doorway and watched him ride off, always with a soft smile. It wasn't easy to watch someone you love disappear into the unknown, but she trusted him. Every time Jesse rode away, he carried something special with him, a small photograph of Zerelda. It wasn't fancy, but it meant everything to him. It reminded him of the home waiting for him, of the woman who believed in him when so many others did not. Whenever he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, he would look at that picture and it gave him strength. While he was away, Zerelda filled her days with work. She kept the house tidy, tended to the garden, and sometimes visited neighbors and family. People often whispered about Jessie. Some were curious, some were judgmental, but Zerelda learned to smile and say very little. She protected her love fiercely, not through loud arguments, but through quiet dignity. She didn't owe anyone an explanation for why she stood by Jessie. She simply loved him, and that was enough. At night, when the house grew still and the world outside was silent, she would sit by the window holding a lamp, waiting. Sometimes she would see nothing but darkness. Other times she would hear the soft sound of a horse's hooves. And when Jessie finally returned, dusty from the road but smiling at the sight of her heart would feel full again. Their time together after each of his returns was precious. They never wasted a moment. Jessie would tell her little stories, not about everything he did, but about the towns he passed through, the sunsets he saw, the people he met. He liked making her laugh, and she loved hearing the warmth in his voice when he spoke to her. They would take long walks through the fields. Jessie would talk about his dream of having a farm of their own, far away from anything complicated. He pictured rows of corn, a red barn, children running barefoot in the grass, and a place where no one cared about old stories. Zerelda would listen quietly, holding his hand. She didn't need to tell him how much she believed in that dream. It was written in the way she looked at him. Still, deep down, she understood that their life wasn't ordinary. The world outside sometimes looked at them differently. When they visited town together, people often stared. Some whispered, some crossed the street, and others smiled politely without saying much. Jessie noticed these things, but he never let them see his heart. He walked with quiet confidence, and Zerelda walked beside him, her head held high. What many people didn't know was how much Zerelda helped keep their life together steady. She was like the quiet center of a spinning wheel. Jessie's world could be unpredictable, but when he came home, she made it feel calm. She didn't try to change who he was, but she gently gave him reasons to hope for something better. There were nights when Jessie couldn't sleep. The world outside was loud even when it was silent, but Zerelda would sit beside him, holding his hand or whispering soft words. She had a way of reminding him that he wasn't just a name in a newspaper. He was a man, a husband, a father, a dreamer. And in those moments, Jessie felt more peace than anywhere else. When their children were born, their love grew even deeper. Jessie adored his family. He would hold his little ones and smile in a way that only Zerelda saw. In their home, he wasn't an outlaw or a famous name. He was just Papa to his children and Jessie to the woman who had loved him long before the world began to tell stories about him. The children loved when Jessie returned from his trips. He always brought them small things. A ribbon for the girl, a carved wooden toy for the boy. Zerelda would watch him with the children and feel something gentle in her chest. No matter what the world thought, she saw a man who loved deeply. But with the joy also came quiet challenges. They couldn't always stay in one place for long. Sometimes Jessie decided they needed to move, and Zerelda followed without a complaint. Packing up a house was never easy, but she did it with patience. She understood that their love meant more than a location. Home wasn't a building to her. Home was wherever Jessie and the children were. Neighbors and family members often asked why she didn't try to live separately from Jessie, why she didn't choose an easier life. She would just smile softly. Because love doesn't turn away when things get hard, she would say. Love stays. Zerelda had a quiet strength that many couldn't see at first glance. She wasn't loud or dramatic, but she was firm in her heart. Her love was not built on excitement or fairy tales. It was built on shared history, deep trust, and a belief that a better life was worth holding on to. Jessie, too, felt that. When he rode through long roads with cold wind against his face, he didn't just think about himself. He thought about her hands setting the table, her hair glowing in the light of a lamp, her laughter on the porch at night. He thought about the warmth of their little home, and how she always made it feel safe no matter where they were. Each return felt like the first time. She would open the door with a smile that could calm even the most restless heart. He would step inside, remove his hat, and the world would shrink down to just the two of them. Their love story didn't need grand gestures to prove its strength. It lived in small everyday things: a shared glance over a warm meal, a hand reaching for another during a quiet walk, a soft laugh in the night, a promise whispered without words. Even though they lived under a sky filled with uncertainty, Jesse and Zerelda made their own kind of peace. It wasn't loud, but it was real. People could say what they wanted. The world could think what it liked. But when the door closed at night and the lamp was turned low, they were just two people in love holding on to their little world. Zerelda never asked Jesse to be someone else. She didn't try to rewrite his past. She simply believed in the good inside him, the good she had seen since childhood. And Jesse, in return, cherished her like a treasure he could never replace. It was this love, steady, quiet, and unshakable, that kept them together through every uncertain season. Their bond was more than a story whispered through towns. It was a real marriage between two souls who chose each other, over and over again, no matter what came their way. The year was 1882. The sun over Missouri still rose each morning, warm and golden, just as it always had. But for Jesse James, something inside him was beginning to change. He had spent many years living a restless life, always moving from one place to another, never truly able to settle. But now, more than ever, he longed for quiet days with Zerelda Mims and their children. He was tired of running from shadows. He was tired of being a story that people whispered about in every town. What he wanted was something so simple, yet so rare for a man like him: a steady life, where the sound of horses didn't mean trouble, where the knock on the door didn't bring worry, and where the only thing that filled their days was family laughter and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. So Jesse made a decision. He and Zerelda moved to a quiet neighborhood in St. Joseph, Missouri. They used different names, pretending to be just another ordinary family. To the people around them, they were simply Mr. and Mrs. Howard. It was a peaceful little town with neat houses, friendly neighbors, and quiet streets where children played in the evenings. Jesse had never experienced a place quite like this in a long time. Every morning he would step out on the porch, breathe in the fresh air, and look at the simple house he had made for his family. Zerelda would be inside preparing breakfast, and the children's laughter would echo softly through the rooms. These were the moments he wanted to keep forever. For the first time in many years, Jesse truly believed it might be possible to build the life he had always dreamed of. He started to enjoy the little routines that ordinary people often took for granted. He helped with chores, worked around the house, and spent long hours playing with the children. He loved hearing them laugh. That sound made everything else fade away. Zerelda could see the change in him. There was something softer in his eyes now, something more at peace. At night they would sit together after the children had gone to bed, and Jesse would talk about how they might plant a garden in the spring, how he wanted to buy more land and build something permanent. "Just think, Zerelda," he said one night as they sat in the lamplight, "a place that belongs only to us. No one asking questions, no more moving, just peace." She smiled and touched his hand gently. "That's all I've ever wanted," she whispered. Those quiet evenings were her favorite. The world outside seemed far away then. Inside their home, they were just a man and a woman sharing dreams. She believed in those dreams with her whole heart. But as Jesse began to imagine this new life, the world around them slowly began to shift. Even though they were living under new names, he could feel the weight of his past pressing at the edges of their peaceful world. Some people whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. Some faces stayed a little too long when passing their house. He could feel it in the air. Something was moving, quietly but surely. Still, Jesse tried not to let the feeling reach his family. He smiled more, told the children stories at night, and made sure Zerelda felt safe. But inside, he knew that the life he wanted so badly was balanced on something fragile, something that could break without warning. During this time, Jesse trusted a few people around him. He had to be careful, but he believed that a small circle of men could help him leave his old life behind completely. Among them were two brothers who had come to him not long ago, Robert Ford and Charles Ford. They were young, polite, and eager to be close to him. Jesse thought they admired him. He treated them kindly, let them into his circle, and believed they could be part of his plan to build a quieter future. Zerelda, however, had a way of sensing things. She was gentle, but she was also wise. She watched the young men carefully, not with anger, but with quiet eyes that noticed the little things. She saw the way they sometimes whispered when Jessie wasn't looking, the way they stayed longer than necessary. Something about their smiles didn't always reach their eyes, but she didn't speak of it often. She trusted Jessie's judgment. Still, in her heart, she felt a thin thread of unease. Meanwhile, life at home continued in its soft rhythm. Mornings were bright. Zerelda would open the windows and let the cool breeze fill the house. Jessie would play with the children in the yard, laughing as they chased each other in the grass. Some evenings, they would all take a walk together, hand in hand under the soft glow of the setting sun. It was in these moments that Jessie felt almost normal. He was no longer a name in a headline or a man hiding in the shadows. He was simply a husband and a father, and he wanted nothing more than to keep it that way. But the whispers outside grew louder, though still too soft for the children to hear. Rumors spread quietly through the town. Some people began to wonder if Mr. Howard was really who he said he was. Jessie could feel the change in the way neighbors greeted him. Some still smiled kindly, but others began to keep a little more distance. He had lived long enough to understand how quickly small whispers could grow into something dangerous. Still, he held on to hope. He told himself that love, family, and quiet living would be enough to protect them. He told himself that the past could be left behind if he walked carefully and trusted the right people. One night, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Jessie sat at the small wooden table with Zerelda. A single lamp lit the room, casting a soft glow on their faces. He looked at her with a tired but gentle smile. "Z," he said softly, calling her by the name he always used when they were alone. "I'm going to make this work. I want you to believe that." She reached out and held his hand. "I already do," she whispered. "I always have." Those words meant everything to him. In that moment, with the sound of the wind outside and the warm light between them, Jessie truly believed they had a chance. The next few weeks felt calm again. Zerelda focused on making their house a real home. She planted flowers by the porch. She taught the children songs and told them stories at bedtime. Jessie took long walks alone some mornings, thinking about how far he had come. He believed this quiet life was finally within reach. The Ford brothers visited often. Jessie welcomed them as he had before. He shared his plans with them, about buying land, about making a clean start. He didn't see anything to fear. To him, they were just two young men trying to find their place in the world, just like he once had. But Zerelda still felt that unease growing quietly in her chest. She would watch Jessie talk with them and feel a chill she couldn't explain. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't nothing. Every evening, after the visitors left, she would hold Jessie a little tighter, as if she could keep him safe through the strength of her love alone. He would smile at her, not realizing the depth of her quiet worry. Jessie, however, still carried his hope like a small flame in his heart. He imagined a spring morning when he and Zerelda would pack their things, move to the countryside, and begin a brand new life. He pictured his children growing up free, their names unconnected to the stories people whispered. He pictured growing old beside Zerelda, far away from everything that had ever troubled him. He didn't know how close the wind was to blowing out that fragile flame. Still, in those final calm days, Jessie's world was full of ordinary, tender moments. Soft laughter at the dinner table, quiet walks in the cool evenings, sweet glances shared between two people who had loved each other since they were young. To anyone passing by their house, they looked like any other family living a peaceful life. And in many ways, they were. Jessie believed with all his heart that love could hold everything together. Zerelda believed that too, though in her heart, she also carried a quiet prayer each night, asking for their little world to stay safe just a little longer. The outside world was stirring, but inside their home they clung to each other with hope, as if nothing could ever change what they had built together. The morning of April 3, 1882, began like any other day in the little house on Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri. Jesse James opened his eyes to the soft light of dawn spilling through the curtains. Birds were singing outside and the air smelled fresh, touched by the cool spring breeze. For a moment as he lay there, it felt like everything he had ever wanted was within reach. Beside him, Zerelda Mims was already awake. She was always an early riser. She had a gentle way of moving in the morning, as if she didn't want to disturb the peace around her. She hummed a soft tune while folding clothes at the foot of the bed. Jesse watched her quietly, feeling grateful for the calmness she brought into his life. He got up, washed his face, and went to the porch for a moment. The street outside was quiet. A few neighbors were tending to their gardens, and the smell of fresh bread floated through the air. Jesse breathed deeply. This was the kind of morning he had dreamed of for so long. A simple, ordinary day. Inside, Zerelda prepared breakfast for the family. She liked setting the table nicely, even on quiet days. She placed warm biscuits on a plate, poured fresh milk for the children, and made sure everything looked perfect. Jesse helped by bringing in wood for the stove and checking the horses outside. Their children came running down the small hallway, laughing as they always did. Jesse scooped them up in his arms, spinning them around just enough to make them giggle. Those little moments, the sound of their laughter, the light in their eyes, made him believe that their quiet life could last forever. After breakfast, Jesse sat by the window. The house was filled with sunlight, warm and golden. Zerelda joined him with a cup of coffee. They didn't speak much at first. They didn't need to. After so many years together, their silence carried its own kind of language. Jesse looked at her and smiled softly. "I'm glad we're here," he said. Zerelda's smile was warm, the kind that reached her eyes. "Me too," she replied. "It feels peaceful. Peace." That was the word that wrapped around their little home like a soft blanket. For months, Jesse had been trying to build a quiet, steady life, away from the noise of the world. And sitting there with Zerelda, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and the smell of warm bread, it felt like maybe, just maybe, that dream was finally coming true. Later that morning, two familiar visitors arrived, Robert Ford and Charles Ford. They had been around often in recent weeks. Jesse welcomed them as usual, offering a friendly smile. He believed they were loyal and trusted them as companions in his plans for the future. Zerelda greeted them politely, though that quiet feeling of unease inside her grew a little stronger. She couldn't quite explain it, even to herself. It was like a soft wind she couldn't see but could feel. She had learned to trust her heart, and that morning, her heart felt heavier than usual. Still, she didn't show it on her face. She moved gracefully through the house, keeping everything in order. She watched the men talk, laughing lightly, and she held on to hope that the uneasiness was just in her mind. Jesse, meanwhile, was cheerful. He talked with the brothers about plans for the future. He spoke about how he wanted to move his family to a small farm where no one would care about his past. He talked about planting apple trees and raising horses. His voice was full of hope, and it was clear he was picturing a better life. The Ford brothers nodded and smiled. They listened to every word. To Jesse, it felt like friendship. To Zerelda, it felt like something she couldn't quite name. As the morning moved along, Jesse decided to take care of a few small things around the house. He was particular about keeping everything neat. He liked making sure their home looked just right, not because of anyone else, but because it mattered to him that Zerelda had a beautiful place to live. The sun climbed higher, and light poured through the windows, bright and golden. Zerelda stood in the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, watching Jesse move around the living room. It was such an ordinary moment, so calm and gentle, yet something inside her stirred. She didn't know why, but she felt the urge to hold on to it a little longer. To remember every detail of that morning. The way the curtains fluttered in the wind, the way Jesse's voice sounded, the way their children's laughter filled the house like music. Jesse noticed a picture frame slightly tilted on the wall. It was a small photograph of Zerelda, the one he had always carried close to his heart. Now it hung in their home, a quiet reminder of everything he held dear. He walked over to straighten it, wanting it to be perfect. Zerelda looked at him from across the room. There was something almost poetic about the way the light touched his face, the way he stood there carefully fixing something so small. She thought of all the years they had shared, the early days of laughter in the fields, the quiet nights in small houses, the whispered dreams about a better future. All of it seemed to live in that one still moment. He turned and caught her looking at him. Their eyes met. They didn't need to speak. A soft smile passed between them, a smile built on years of shared history and quiet love. In the background, the Ford brothers stood near the door, watching. Zerelda didn't like the way they whispered to each other. She couldn't hear what they said, but something about their posture made her uneasy. She brushed the thought away and reminded herself to focus on the good things. Her children playing, her husband smiling, the sunlight warming their home. The day seemed calm, yet it carried a strange stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before something shifts. Jesse felt none of it. He was too busy living in the moment, enjoying the simple peace he had built around him. He sat down with the children, listening to their small stories and playful chatter. He loved the way their faces lit up when they talked about little things. Zerelda joined them on the floor, and for a while everything felt like the happy life they had both imagined for so long. Jesse looked around the room. He saw his wife, his children, the sunlight dancing on the walls, the warm wood of their small home. And inside his heart something settled. He felt sure of one thing. No matter what the world outside thought of him, here in this house he was loved, purely and fully. He reached for the photograph again, carefully holding it for a brief moment before setting it down gently. That picture meant everything to him. It reminded him of the girl who had believed in him when the world doubted him. It reminded him of the woman who had stood beside him through every storm. Zerelda came and sat beside him. He reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they were made to fit together. She leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. "Everything's going to be all right," Jesse said softly. "I know," Zerelda whispered back. Her voice trembled just a little, not out of fear but out of love. The children ran off to play outside. Zerelda stood at the window watching them. Jesse stayed behind her, looking at the same scene. It was a picture of everything they had ever dreamed of: laughter, sunlight, and hope. Outside, the town carried on like any other day. People walked down the street. A few horses passed by. Neighbors greeted each other with polite nods. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, safe. Inside the house, however, the air felt a little heavier, though only Zerelda could feel it. It was like a soft warning she couldn't explain. She turned to Jesse. He gave her that calm, steady look, the same one he had given her many times when the world outside felt uncertain. She held on to that look like it was a promise. The Ford brothers stayed nearby, their voices low, their faces calm. To anyone looking in, it was just a group of friends talking on a quiet morning. To Zerelda, though, it felt like something was quietly changing, something invisible but real. Jesse, unaware of how the air around him was shifting, focused only on the love in the room. His heart was full of Zerelda and their children, of dreams and hopes, of the belief that love could hold everything together. And in that moment, with sunlight warming the house, with laughter floating through the air, with his hand still remembering the touch of that beloved photograph, he felt like the world was exactly as it should be. That soft, golden morning would remain forever, not just in memory but in the quiet story of a man who, more than anything else, loved his family with his whole heart. The days that followed in St. Joseph carried a quiet, almost unreal calm. The little house on Lafayette Street seemed to hold its breath. It was as if the walls themselves remembered every sound, every laugh, every gentle word spoken there. The neighbors still passed by on their way to the market. Children still played on the dirt road outside. But inside, the air felt different, softer, quieter, as if time itself had slowed down. For Zerelda, the house was no longer just a place to live. It became a memory woven into every brick, every chair, and every picture on the wall. Every step she took echoed with pieces of her life with Jesse. His boots still sat neatly by the door. His hat still hung on the peg where he had left it. And in the living room, the small photograph he loved so much still rested where he had carefully placed it. She would walk through the house in the early mornings, just as she had when he was there. She opened the windows and let the fresh breeze drift in, carrying the smell of earth and new spring leaves. Sometimes she could almost hear his voice calling from the porch or his laughter as he played with the children in the yard. She knew he was gone, yet in many ways it felt like he had never really left. Love has a way of lingering, like the scent of warm bread long after it's baked, or the warmth of a fire after the last flame fades. The world outside, however, did not stay still. Jesse's name was once again on everyone's lips. Some spoke with excitement, some with shock, others with endless stories that grew bigger each time they were told. But for Zerelda, none of those stories truly mattered. What the world saw was a legend. What she remembered was a man and her husband, the one who had brought her wildflowers, who had laughed with their children, who had spoken softly about dreams of an orchard and a quiet farm. In the days that followed, people came by their house. Some came out of curiosity, others out of kindness. Some whispered questions as if she could give them the answers they craved. Zerelda listened politely, but her heart stayed far away from their chatter. She had no interest in being part of the stories others created. Her story was different. It wasn't about the name people repeated with excitement. It was about love. Quiet, steady love. She spent long hours sitting on the porch, the same porch where they had watched so many sunsets together. The wind would move through the trees and she would close her eyes, remembering how his hand felt in hers. She remembered their laughter, their walks, their whispered dreams in the stillness of the night. The children often came to her with questions. They were young, but they understood more than most people thought. They asked where Papa had gone. Zerelda never used big or harsh words. She knelt down, held their hands gently, and told them that their father loved them deeply and that love never truly disappears. She told them that love was like sunlight. Even when you couldn't see the sun, its warmth was still there. She kept their daily routines alive. She made breakfast in the mornings even when the house felt too quiet. She brushed the children's hair, helped them with their lessons, and told them stories at bedtime. She wanted them to grow up remembering not just what happened, but how it felt to be loved. In quiet moments, she would take out Jesse's photograph, the same one he had carried with him for so long. She would hold it carefully, as if it were made of something delicate and precious, and in many ways it was. That photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a reminder of how deeply one person could love another. It was a symbol of the bond they had built long before the world turned their story into something bigger than themselves. The whispers around town didn't stop. People talked. They always would. But Zerelda learned to walk through those whispers like a breeze through tall grass. She didn't answer their questions, and she didn't try to change their minds. She didn't need to. She had something far more real than rumors. She had memories. She had love. In the months that followed, Zerelda found a quiet strength inside her. She had always been strong, though she had never tried to show it loudly. It was the kind of strength that came from years of loving someone deeply, even in difficult times. She didn't let her sadness consume her. Instead, she carried Jesse's memory like a soft, steady flame in her heart. She kept the house just as it had been. She tended to the garden they had once planned together. She grew flowers by the porch just as he had said he wanted. Every time she touched the soil, she felt closer to him. It wasn't a sad closeness. It was gentle, like a warm breeze on a cool morning. Many people expected her to be bitter or broken, but she wasn't. She chose love over bitterness. She chose memory over noise. When people came to talk about Jesse as if he were just a story, she would smile softly and say, "He was more than a name in a newspaper. He was my husband. He loved us." Those who knew her well began to see that the love between Jesse and Zerelda was something special, something that could not be erased by time or changed by other people's words. Their love had always lived in quiet places, in long walks and soft glances, in shared dreams whispered in the dark. And now it lived on in the hearts of those who truly mattered, especially their children. As the years passed, the world continued to talk about Jesse James. His name became part of songs, stories, and books. Some painted him as a legend. Others called him many things. But in Zerelda's heart, he was the young man she had known long before anyone else cared about his name. He was the boy who had brought her wild flowers, the man who had dreamed of planting apple trees, the husband who had held her hand on quiet nights. Whenever she walked through the house, she would pause by that little photograph on the wall, the one he had straightened on that golden morning. It stayed there year after year. She dusted it gently, never letting it fade. To her, it wasn't just a picture. It was a promise. She grew older, as people do, but she never remarried. Not because she was bitter or lonely, but because she had already lived her great love story. She carried it with her every day, in her heart, in her hands, in her gentle way of speaking about him. Sometimes in the evenings, she would sit with her children and tell them stories about their father. Not the stories the world told, but the real ones. She told them about how he laughed, how he loved the smell of warm bread, how his eyes softened when he talked about the future. She told them about how, no matter what the world said, he had loved them all deeply. The children grew up with those stories, not with fear or anger, but with warmth. They knew their father not as a legend, but as a man who had dreamed of a simple, good life with his family. As time moved forward, people came and went. The world changed. But that small house in St. Joseph remained a quiet place where a love story had once bloomed. Neighbors who had been children themselves remembered walking past the house and seeing the James family on their porch, laughing, smiling, living an ordinary day that, to them, had seemed magical. When Zerelda grew old, she still sat on that porch. She still felt the wind moving through the trees, just like it had when Jesse sat beside her. She still talked to him softly in her heart, not with sadness, but with love that had never dimmed. In her final years, people would often say, she loved him all her life. And it was true. It wasn't a love built on grand gestures or perfect endings. It was a love built on shared days, whispered dreams, quiet trust, and deep understanding. When she closed her eyes, the first thing she thought of was always the same. The way he had smiled at her across a warm kitchen table, the way his hand had felt in hers, the way they had believed, even for a little while, that their love could build a peaceful world of its own. Their story lived on, not just in the songs or the whispers of strangers, but in the quiet corners of the hearts of those who knew what true love looked like. And long after the world changed and the names in the newspapers were forgotten, their love still echoed softly, like a gentle breeze on a spring morning. Because some love stories don't end. They simply settle into the air, into the earth, into memory. For Zerelda, love was never about the stories others told. It was about the quiet truth between two people who had shared a life. And in that truth she carried Jesse with her always.